Many people joining in such numbers. My name is Jane Carrigan. I'm a national contact point for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions in Ireland. And before I introduce the webinar, I want to mention that we have closed captioning available today, and you can alter the size of those captions by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Our webinar this morning is focused on the EU's MSCA Doctoral Networks programme. This programme used to be known as ITN, but under Horizon Europe, it was rebranded and is now known as Doctoral Networks. Just a reminder that doctoral networks are international consortia or partnerships of organisations from across sectors and disciplines who come together to create and implement state-of-the-art doctoral training programmes. And the networks are designed to provide world-class training and support career development through doctoral research projects, which promote and facilitate what we sometimes call the 3 I's: international, intersectoral and interdisciplinary collaboration. The 2022 call will open next week on the 12th of May, and today's webinar is for staff from both academic and non-academic organisations. And as I said, it's great to have so many of you with us this morning. There will be a Q&A session today, so I invite you to post any questions you may have onto the Q&A function, and we will address as many of these as we can. And many thanks to those of you who've already submitted questions at registration. My colleague, Dr. Yvonne Halpin, head of the Irish Marie Skłodowska-Curie office and fellow national contact point, will be monitoring the Q&A and also placing some helpful resources in our chat function. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available through our website, and all those registered will receive a link to the recording when it's ready. And we'll update also on Twitter to let people know that's the case. Before I introduce the panel, I want to explain to you a little more about the Irish Marie Skłodowska-Curie office, or IMSCO for short. So I'll ask the speakers to turn off their cameras and I will share my few slides. I hope everyone can see my slides.
Looks good, Jane.
Great, thank you, Yvonne. So just to let you know that the IMSCO is supported by the Irish Research Council and jointly operated with the Irish Universities Association. And our mission is to support the research community in Ireland across all sectors and all disciplines in applying to MSCA calls and in implementing MSCA projects. And Ireland has been successful in securing MSCA funding. So under H2020, it received over 196 million euro, and in ITNs alone, 150 grant agreements were signed by Irish beneficiaries, with a drawdown of just over 83 million. So with Horizon Europe, which, as you know, is the successor to H2020, there are great opportunities to build on our success. And here in the IMSCO, we support applicants in a number of ways, including providing a review service of draft applications, as well as providing information and resources. We're delighted to be involved in a project with our NCB colleagues in Europe, and the project is called MCA Net. And one of the outputs of that project is to produce a handbook for applicants of the doctoral network call, and that will be ready by September. We have a number of resources here on this slide that you might find useful. Some of these resources are from our own web pages in the IUA, and they might be a very useful starting point for just getting an introduction to the call. We've also placed on this slide key partner search tools. So the European Commission has a partner search tool that could be explored. And if you want to find an Irish civil society organisation as a partner, our colleagues in Access Europe, which is an EU funding support service for Irish civil society, have a new online tool that allows you to search for civic society organisations. Just to mention also that the IUA also hosts Euro Access Ireland, and that provides lots of practical supports for researchers and is a great resource to have. You can see on the slide here the types of queries that Euro Access Ireland can help you with, and they can range from a host of issues. For example, if you have a query with mobility employment of researchers with a refugee background, or you have a query in relation to the hosting agreement scheme, or need advice on visa guidelines, our colleague, Dr. Magda Wisłocka, who's head of Euro Access Ireland, is happy to help with any queries. If you need to contact us in the Irish Marie Curie office, you can reach myself and Yvonne at mariecurie@iua.ie. You can also follow us on Twitter. We post regular updates there, and also on LinkedIn also. I'm delighted to be joined in our panel today by Caroline Peters of the European Research Executive Agency, who will present an overview of the Doctoral Network's action. And showcasing successful ITN awardees from Ireland, we have Dr. Lawrence Fitzhenry, an MSCA ITN coordinator of the project Orbital. And Lawrence will be joined by Tess Ames, who is Orbital's project manager. Lawrence and Tess were from the institution formerly known as Waterford Institution of Technology, but is now since May 1st, SETU, Ireland's Southeast Technical University, and I'm really delighted to be able to say that. And from Dublin City University, we are joined by Professor Jane Souter, who's the MSCA ITN coordinator of JOLT, an ITN which focuses on harnessing digital technologies in communication. I'll stop sharing my slides now and I'll introduce our first speaker. So Caroline Peters has a master's in EU law and has also been working for EU institutions since 2001. She has been a project officer at RIA in the unit in charge of ITNs and now of course doctoral networks since 2014, and in that time has gained significant experience at the call. Caroline, I invite you now to share your screen, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the webinar today.
Yes, hello. So I tried to share. Can you see my screen?
I think yes, we can
okay,
see it.
I will put it in presentation mode. Yes, okay. You have my full screen, yes.
That's great, thanks Caroline.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, so like Jane already said, I'm a project officer in the Research Executive Agency. And as a project officer, my main job is actually following the successful projects during the whole project duration. So we help them with all kinds of questions they may have, and also with the finances, we check that everything is done like it should be done. But we also help a bit with the call preparation and also with the evaluations. So in my presentation today, I will present all aspects. So how to prepare proposals, how we evaluate, and actually how you manage the projects then. And I also wanted to say that my presentation is based on the assumption that you already know a bit the Horizon 2020 ITN calls. So I'm making a lot of comparison with the ITNs. If you don't know them at all, it might be a bit confusing, but you can read all the information later on. You will get a copy of the slides. So I also will go through some slides very quickly because it's a lot of information and it will not concern everybody. So you can read the information in more detail afterwards. I'm just presenting what I think is most important for you now for the current application if you're interested. Okay, how do I, yeah. Next. Yes, so what I will present is now first just situating the MSCA actions under the Horizon Europe programs, then a bit what are actually the doctoral networks, how to submit proposals and what are the award criteria under the doctoral networks, how we evaluate the projects, and then a bit about the budget structure, how you actually implement a successful project from a legal administrative point of view. And then some details. We already had one doctoral network that call that just closed. So we have some experience from the previous call, and we have the next call opening soon. And then you also have some resources. So you will get the slides to get more information for the future. Yeah, so like under Horizon 2020, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions fall under the first pillar. So we don't have a major change here. It's still excellent science. Also for the actions, they are quite similar. So the actions we have now are the doctoral networks that replace more or less, it's very similar to the previous ITNs. We have the postdoctoral fellowships and that replace more or less the former individual fellowships. We have the staff exchanges, we have the co-fund and the MSCA and citizens. So this presentation is focused on the doctoral networks and what are the main objectives. They are, so we want to respond to well-identified needs in various research and innovation areas, and all our projects are bottom-up. which I like very much as a project officer, because we get very different projects in all different areas. It's very interesting. So it's also an opportunity for everybody to apply in all types of research areas. And we want to expose the recruited researchers to the academic and non-academic sectors. We want to offer training in research-related competences, but also other competences with the relevant for innovation and for long-term employability. And yeah, we focus on research and transferable skills via intersectoral secondments. The researchers need to have career development plans. There's a focus on supervision, internationalization, and attractiveness. And for this in the Horizon Europe doctoral networks, we have 3 modalities. So this hasn't changed a lot. It's again, the industrial doctorates, which are similar to the previous EIDs, which include training in academia and industry, with a joint supervision by both an academic and an industry supervisor. We have the joint doctorates, which are joint collaborations leading to a joint or multiple doctoral degree with a joint selection and supervision. And a pre-agreement for joint degrees is required already at proposal stage. And then we have the standard doctoral networks, which are training in academia and or industry. So this is just a short overview of the eligible participants, but you should go for more details actually in the work program, because the list of eligible countries changes, especially the associated countries and other countries. But overall, we have all EU countries are eligible, the member states and their overseas countries and territories. Then we have non-EU countries, so mainly the countries associated to Horizon Europe, the low, middle, and income countries, which you can find in the program guide, and then other countries when announced in the call, or if their participation is essential. And basically this will be evaluated at proposal stage, whether participation is essential or not. And the same for some specific cases. So you have specific cases for EU bodies and international organizations. I'm not going into detail for this. If this applies, you can read the details in the work program or in the slides. So who is actually applying? So we always, it's not an individual project, it's a consortium that applies, and it's different universities, research institutions, research infrastructures, businesses, including SMEs, and other socioeconomic actors. And we need to have at least 3 independent legal entities, each established in a different member states or associated country. And at least 1 beneficiary needs to be from a member state. And then on top of this minimum, any entity from any third country can join. And for the associated partners, basically there is no minimum. Here's just an overview on the difference between the full beneficiaries and the associated partners. So both can be from academic and non-academic sectors, but only the full beneficiaries sign the grant agreement. It's also the full beneficiaries that recruit the researchers, and that's mandatory. The training and hosting of seconded researchers can be done by both. They also both participate in the supervisory board, and only the beneficiaries, because they sign the grant agreement, they are part of the contract, they can claim direct costs. Just a small overview what we actually understand by academic and non-academic sector. So the academic sector is public or private higher education establishments, public or private non-profit research organizations, and international European research organizations. And the non-academic sector is actually any socioeconomic actor not included in the academic sector. So we call the doctorates industrial doctorates, but it's not necessarily industry, it's non-academic. So what are the specific features for the doctoral networks? This is a bit different from ITN. So we have, for the standard doctoral networks, we have 360 person months. This used to be 540. And if you see, the fellowships for the doctoral candidates are still between 3 and 36 months. So if you have a standard fellowship of 36 months, this means you will be able to recruit 10 doctoral candidates. And for the joint and industrial doctorates, we give the possibility to add another 180 person months, so another 5 doctoral candidates. The duration is still 48 months. But the recruitment is still only between 3 and 36 months. Then the secondments can be worldwide and up to 1/3 of the fellowship duration. This has changed to the previous ITNs where it was 30%. And for the industrial doctorates, they need to still spend 50% in the non-academic sector. However, the academic and non-academic organization jointly supervising can be in the same country. So this was not the case in the previous ITNs. Then if you're successful and you're recruiting the researchers, so you have the possibility to recruit 360 person months or 480 if you're in the joint and industrial doctorates, and all beneficiaries must recruit at least 1 doctoral candidate. This is also different from the ITNs, where in some in the EIDs it was possible to have beneficiaries that just hosted the researcher on secondment. So all beneficiaries are required to host at their premises and supervise the recruited researchers or use associated partners linked to them to do so. There's also criteria for the eligibility of the researchers you recruit. So the supported researchers must be doctoral candidates, so not already in a possession of a doctoral degree at the date of recruitment. And this is new, they must be enrolled in a doctoral program. In practice, this was already the case for 95% of the recruited researchers, but now it's mandatory. And they must be at least in 1 EU member state or associated country, or at least 2 for the joint doctorates. They can still be of any nationality, and the mobility rule is the same. They must not have resided or carry out the main activity in the country of the recruiting beneficiary for more than 12 months in the 36 months immediately before the recruitment date. We still have the 40% rule, which means that not more than 30% of the EU contribution may be allocated to beneficiaries in the same country or to a single international organization. So this is a summary again of what I basically said before. The main differences is now the size, that the fact that all beneficiaries must recruit, that there's only doctoral candidates, that the secondments are now up to 1/3, and that then 50% in the non-academic sector can be from the same country. Again, this is an overview with all the details and the differences of the different funding modes. You can have a closer look at this if you're interested, and depending on what mode you choose. So now we go to the proposal submission. How does it actually work? So we, as you just said, the next call will open soon on the 12th of May. And I've actually heard this morning that there still have been some changes to the Part B and to the guide for applicants, which I haven't seen the newest version of the Part B, but as soon as it will be published, you will be able to look at this. And I suggest that you go there and look at it, because they are, from the previous call, they are quite clear, and there's a lot of information in there. But just to summarize a few changes that we had compared to the ITNs. So in the Part A, we now have a researchers table. We have a description of the role of participating organizations, and we have the self-declaration on gender equality, and also the ethics self-assessment has moved from Part B previously to the Part A, and there's the new security questionnaire. And in the Part B, you have a glossary of terms for the consistency of use of terminology, is in short. And you have extensive explanation on what exactly should be included in each section. So I really suggest that you look at this, because it has all the award, it's structured by the award criteria that I will show you quickly afterwards, but it's very useful because it really explains what we actually want. And so once the proposal submission is open, you have 3 submission links. So one per modality, one for the standard ITNs, one for the industrial doctorates, and one for the joint doctorates. But I have to specify that we don't evaluate them in separate panels anymore. They will be evaluated in the same scientific panel. So the industrial and joint doctorates compete with standard doctorates in a particular scientific panel. So chemistry, engineering, maths, physics. I have a list of the scientific panels at the end. You have the associated partners register that they register like the beneficiaries. You can select the scientific panel and the keywords, and you have to fill in the unit cost budget table. And so, like I said, the Part B template follows the award criteria. It has the same page limit as before, and all the instructions are included in the template. And I found the last template already quite clear, and it has been updated based on feedback we got. So I hope it will be really clear for all of you now. Then the part B2 is still the description of participants, the letters of commitments, and for the joint doctorates, we have the mandatory letter of pre-agreement, and there's also a template for this. So now the award criteria, this is an overview, just I'm not going into details. Also, you can read all the award criteria in the slides or in the Part B template. It's just to show you that the weighting is basically the same as it used to be in the ITNs. So the excellence still counts for 50%, the impact for 30%, and the quality and efficiency of the implementation for 20%. So like I said, it's really by criterion. So each criterion includes the aspects to be taken into account. The same aspect is not included in different criteria, so it is not assessed twice. You really go step by step via the award criteria. And open science practices are assessed as part of the scientific methodology and the excellence criterion now. Here are some novelties, but I'm not gonna go into all the novelties. You have some criteria. So just to say that in excellence, we have a new criteria 1.2. In impact, we have this new criterion 2.3, but it's really self-explanatory. And also in the Part B, you will get an explanation of what is needed here. In impact, we also have the 2.4, which is a novelty. And in the quality and efficiency of the implementation, we have a new 3.1, which especially takes into account also the new MSCA Green Charter, and the point 3.2 on quality, capacity, and role of each participant, including hosting arrangement. So it's basically the operational capacity, which we also assessed before, but not under this point. Yeah, so how do we actually evaluate the proposals? So once we have the call deadline, the first thing is that we check the received proposals for the eligibility. So the main eligibility criteria, the number of member states, associated countries, the minimum number, the letters of commitment, and so on. And once we have checked this, we allocate the proposals to evaluators that are specialists in the scientific area. And we allocate those to a minimum of 3 experts per proposal. And they start evaluating those proposals individually. So they don't know who else is evaluating. They're not talking to anyone. It's really the individual assessment of the specific proposal. And only once everybody has done their individual assessment, the experts get together for a consensus meeting and discuss until they come to a common position. And first on the comments, and once they agree on the comments, they also agree on the scoring for each individual proposal. Once we have the consensus results, the whole panel meets in order to find an agreement on the scores and comments, in particular to get consistency of within the whole evaluation. And also it might be sometimes that there's no consensus of conflicts within between the experts. So also we try to agree there on the cases where where the experts didn't reach consent. And then there's also sometimes cases where proposals have exactly the same score, as we have to have a ranking list on which proposal is financed before the other. We don't have an unlimited budget, unfortunately. We have to rank those proposals, and there's specific criteria to rank the proposals with the same score. And once all of this is done, we publish our final ranking list. And this is then when more information for projects actually that have been selected in the ranking list on how the budget works and how the projects need to be implemented. So like in Horizon 2020, we work with unit costs, which is really straightforward. You have one unit corresponding to 1 month of eligible recruited researchers, and the reimbursement rate is 100%. And it includes different cost categories that I will present now. So we still have the costs related to the researchers and the institutional costs. However, in the researcher costs, we have some novelties. They are described in length in several slides, but just to go through the basic categories, again, for those who don't know them, and for the novelties, so we have the living allowance, which is now 3,400 based on the Belgian country coefficient, and then you will actually have to check the documents in different countries. There's different country coefficients, and the researchers might get less or more. You have a mobility allowance also for all recruited doctoral candidates. You have a family allowance of 660 with a novelty, but this will be explained later. And we have 2 new allowances for the researchers, but I think they won't concern most of you. So if you really need it, I think you can look at the explanation later. It's just to say that we have those specific allowances for the researchers. And then for the institutions, we have again the research training and networking contribution and management and indirect contribution. So here, this is about the family allowance. Some of them, the criteria for getting the family allowance are quite similar to what they used to be in ITNs. However, the amount has increased, and the main novelty is that it's due if the researcher has or acquires family obligations during the actions, which wasn't the case before. Before it only counted at recruitment date. This is again an overview. So the new cost categories: the living allowance, mobility allowance, the same as before, family allowance that can be granted now during the project, the long-term leave allowance, and the special need allowance. And in the implementation, so this is also very similar. Each beneficiary must recruit each eligible doctoral candidate under an employment contract or equivalent direct contract with full social security coverage. And in some cases, but this is really very rare, we don't have this very often, if the national legislation doesn't allow to provide an employment contract, you can go for a fixed amount fellowship. But if you have this case, you really need to discuss with your project officer, with us, and we will see. It's on a case-by-case basis. This is with our approval before. Each beneficiary must pay the living and mobility allowance to the recruited researchers. And again, the family obligation can be now changed during the project duration. And this, I'm not gonna go into those 2 allowances. This is when the need arises, we can discuss those. This is the 2 other cost categories for the institutions. This hasn't changed at all, but I will just explain for those who don't know it. So this research training and networking contribution that should cover costs for training and networking activity, research expenses, visa-related fees and travel expenses, and additional costs arising from each secondment of 6 months or less, which require mobility from the place of the residence. And then we have the management and indirect contribution that should cover the beneficiaries' additional costs in connection with the action. So it's basically personnel costs, management meetings, project manager, and so on. And then we this is also the same. The doctoral candidates have to devote themselves full time to the project, and part-time is only allowed for personal and family reasons. But this again, you should discuss with your project officer if you have a case like this. The reporting is also very similar to Horizon 2020. So we have the project duration of 48 months. And from the start date, we have continuous reporting where you submit the deliverables and milestones and other information. And we have 2 periodic reports that are also linked to the interim and final payment. And so at the beginning of the project, the continuous reporting model is activated. And like I said, you will submit progress on the milestones, deliverables. You can also update the publishable summary. You can put information on publications, critical risks, IPRs, and also you can update the mobility declaration with what used to be the researcher declaration. And then at the 2 periodic reports, the first periodic and the final report is submitted 60 days after the end of the reporting period. And again, like before, it consists of 2 parts. The part A, which is automatically generated by the IT system, and the part B, which is the narrative description. But I think once you're selected for a project, you will get more information on this from your project officer. And then you also have at the periodic reporting the financial report, which is basically based on the mobility declarations, so the former researcher declarations. So you really need to fill in the information on the researchers that you recruited and update them regularly, because the individual financial statement is based on that. So there's some of these are novelties, but the first 3, it's basically, this is some mandatory deliverables that we need. So you have to have a supervisory report of the network. You have to have a progress report and a midterm meeting with the area. And then, well, this is now, the name is new, it's the mobility declaration submitted within 20 days after the recruitment of each researchers and updated if needed. And then we have the career development plan. So this was in practice, most projects already had a career development plan for all recruited researchers, but now this is mandatory. And the questionnaires are the same. So for the researchers, they need to fill in an evaluation questionnaire at the end of the training and 2 years after. We also have now the data management plan that is mandatory to be submitted at midterm and to be updated. And a new mandatory deliverable is the plan for dissemination and exploitation of results, including communication activities. So like I said, we just had successfully finalized our last call. And so I have some information on the calls from 21 and 22. So the first Horizon Europe call closed in November. We had a budget of 402 million, and the next call will open very soon. And we have a slightly increased budget. And what you need to consider is for this new call, for this year's call, that there's a resubmission restriction applying for applications that received a score below 80% in the previous call. And this is a bit statistics on the proposals we got this year. So we got a total of 1,077 proposals by the deadline, which is a bit lower than what we usually had, but it's a new call, so we will see this year if we get more. And yeah, we had 52 applications with the Irish coordinators. In total, we had more than 56 countries applying, and yeah, finally selected in the funding range. We had 144 proposals, which means an overall success rate of 13%, which is also a lot higher than in previous years where we had very low success rates, sometimes of 7%. It was really fighting between the best proposals. So this is good to have such a good success rates. And of the proposals that made it into the funding range, we have 9 with Irish coordinators. And we had in total 155 proposals submitted with at least 1 Irish entity. And here you also have a bit an overview of the percentage of proposals above the threshold by scientific panels. I think it's not so visible here on the slide, but you can have a closer look at this when you get the slides, or it's also published on the Funding on Tenders portal. It's just to see how many proposals we had above the funding range in all scientific panels. So it's always high, it's higher than in previous years. And now I have some information for further information. So there's some useful links. If you get the slides, you can look at it. And I think the most important is the Funding and Tenders portal, where the call will now be published and where you find all the call related documents. But then for further questions, you can of course contact your national contact point. And there's also the Research Inquiry Service. And for those that have been successfully selected, your project officer is your main point of contact. And then, yeah, like I said, during the evaluations, we have individual experts helping us with the evaluations. And we're always, as we have so many different scientific areas, we're always looking for new experts to help us with the evaluations. So if you're not considering applying this year, you might consider helping us as an expert with the evaluation. It's also a very interesting experience and helps us a lot. Yeah, so you can follow this link and look at this. And basically that's it for now. Thank you. And we have a question and answer session on everything that was not clear in this presentation now.
Thank you, Caroline. That was a really comprehensive presentation, and it's not easy to give a presentation with the level of detail that's required about the doctoral networks call. So thank you very much for that. The questions are coming in, so thank you for that. We'll hold all questions until the panel session a little later, but you can enter your questions into the Q&A function. I'm going to move now to the first of our 2 case studies, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Lawrence Fitzhenry, who is lecturing chemistry at the Department of Science in SETU and principal investigator of the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group at the PMBRC. He's secured over 5 million research and funding to date and is coordinator of the MSCA funded Orbital project, and his commercialization research has resulted in a spin-out company, Ocudel, which develops advanced drug delivery techniques. Lawrence will be joined by Tess Ames, who brings over 10 years experience in project management, event management, and team and student engagement from both industry and higher education. She's managed large international projects, including Jean Monnet grants under the Erasmus Plus program, and she's currently the project manager for the Orbital project. Welcome to both Lawrence and Tess, and I invite you to share your screens.
Thanks, Jane. Just bear with me for a second. You'll probably see, this always takes me a minute, so I should get it now. So hopefully you can see.
We're seeing the desktop at the moment. We see it.
Slideshow now? Brilliant. Okay. Always takes me a minute. Apologies for that. So you can see the, you can just see the slide and nothing else now. Is that okay? It's in presentation mode.
Yes. Yeah. All good.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Okay, great. And thanks, Jane, for asking us along today to chat about Orbital. I'll just set on my timer to make sure I don't go too far over time. And we're just, delighted to get a chance to kind of talk through some of the stuff. Great to hear Caroline given the presentation. Caroline has been our project officer. We've been lucky enough to have her working with us for the last few years, and has been a great support to us as we've been working through it. And I suppose part of that and the support and working through it is why we have Tess giving the talk today as well. Project management is a key element that we found while we've been running our ITN, which we're midway through now. So I think it's really important to have a project manager and show that the work that they do and how they really drive and push the network along the way. So in the interest of time, I'll move on just to talk a little bit about what the Orbital network is. So basically, the name comes from ocular research by integrated training and learning. So we focus on developing drug delivery strategies to treat the back of the eye. So some of these conditions are some of the main causes of blindness in people over 50 and sight loss in Europe, but really across the world. So that's where we focus on developing drug delivery technologies, but as well as that, and we'll see in the scientific side of things, also models and preclinical models and so on, and in vivo models. But I suppose the name and where we really wanted to focus on, the integrated training and learning as our innovative training networks. The advanced learning, I suppose, comes from the PhD side of it, and our ESRs are doing PhDs. But really, what we focused on is really making sure that we had this training program for our researchers, both scientific and generic and universal skills as well. So of those researchers, we had 15 researchers across 11 countries, partners and beneficiaries in Europe, and also UK, so in Northern Ireland, and then our partners then in the US and Canada as well. So we have a good mix, you can see here, of academic organizations, clinician organizations and clinicians, patient advocacy groups, and then obviously importantly, industry and industrial partners. Of the funding that we received, over 1 million then I suppose was retained on the island of Ireland between Northern Ireland and then ourselves and UCD. And like I said, we're around the halfway point at the moment with the 6-month extension funded till 2024. And I have this here, I won't go too much into the science work package. This is the vast majority of our consortium. This was our first meeting in Santiago de Compostela, our first in-person meeting, but it was actually our year 2 meeting. We got hit with COVID lockdowns just before our kickoff meeting. So, but you can see, I suppose, that not everybody is here, but of the people here, they work throughout all 3 scientific work packages. And that's something we've really focused on is, so even if somebody is working on, for example, ocular models, they will use some of the innovative nanoformulations to test those ocular models. If their primary focus is on enhanced medical devices, well, then they will test those on the ocular models. And we try to have that integration through all work packages for all of our researchers. And it really helps try to push their training then and make that interdisciplinary aspect. So we can have chemists and engineers working in one, and they then work closely on biological aspects of different projects and so on. I suppose, as always, the focus is our researchers, and the ESRs are, I suppose, the new doctoral candidates are the main focus of that, and here are great researchers. And what we've really tried to push is that, as well as having the consortium as their network and Orbital as their network, that they each have their own research groups at home, in their home organizations or research departments if they're in an academic or a non-academic organization. And really what this has helped us to do is to kind of broaden the network and the networking aspect of it. So for example, if we take somebody to SETU for a secondment, we really embed them and integrate them within our own research groups. And we might, for example, ask them to host the training for the researchers there. And this expands not only the network of the Orbital researchers, but also the individual researchers and the host researchers, for example. And we really try push that aspect of it. I guess the training thing, we always had an open and online training program, but while COVID caused a lot of problems, it also really gave us an opportunity to really work on that open and online training and how we could make that open to people and available to more and more people outside of Orbital. And Tess has done a great job with the consortium in developing that. So for example, you can see some examples of some of the training that we have made open and online, but we also have a YouTube channel, for example, and podcasts where many of our sessions are still available and people can still access them, and people outside of Orbital. I suppose the importance of strong partners in this is something I'd like to highlight here. So for example, Dr. Simon Kaya in Loyola University of Chicago has really driven for our open seminar series. So he has organized a journal club for Orbital researchers every fortnight, and that's often open to other researchers as well. But then on the alternate 2 weeks, we have open seminar series, which focus on as well as the science side, but also the more generic skills, innovation, tech transfer, entrepreneurship. And these have been often attended by up to 60 or 70 people from within and without Orbital as well. So some of the scientific workshops we've hosted, you can see examples of here, but why I have these again, some of these are run by our partner organizations, so that this, I suppose, highlights the importance of strong partners. But then what we've also tried to do as it has run on is, and as our program has moved on, is to have our ESRs or doctoral candidates run those programs as well and organize those training programs. So they've been involved in the organization, for example, of the month 18 meetings or year 2 meetings, but they've also run the training sessions in there and developed, and that gives a lot of training for them in the wider aspects of their future careers. We've had a big focus on patient engagement. I won't spend too long on this, but really this has been one aspect of Orbital that we've really tried to highlight. So from the very beginning, we've had our patients training for our scientists and engineers, and to really be able to engage with the people who might one day use their technologies. So we started with training at the kickoff meeting, then we had talks from people living with these conditions in month 18, all the way up to a recent event, a World Cafe event in March of this year, where we had our researchers and our members of our consortium sit down with people in the sight loss community to hear what was important to them and what researchers needed to hear to drive the technology forward. And I think it's probably a good place to hand over to Tess. I'll stop sharing my screen just to show I suppose all the organization that's required to make this happen and has over the last few years. So Tess, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Larry. All right, can you guys see my screen? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, all good.
So this was just one of the outputs from the patient as the teacher workshop we held. So it was kind of a graphic recording that moved through all the discussions, but you can find that on our website. So hi, my name's Tess. I'm the project manager for Orbital, as Larry said there. So we're just going to talk really briefly now, I guess, about kind of the logistics of project management. Carolyn went through the legal kind of side of project management. Larry talked about sort of what it all looks like once it's done. So I'm just going to give a really brief overview of what it feels like as a project manager to be implementing those things. So something that Larry did in the grant had written into it is sort of a two-pronged approach to project management that I wanted to point out that was quite useful. So we had the ESR training and development side, which you can see we have a strong cohort of people that surround all our researchers and give them support and make sure there's the training opportunities. And then we also have the scientific work packages and the communication and dissemination work packages and the sort of overall project management and implementation. Now, it sounds like with the changes to doctoral networks now, this is going to be much easier to have already pre-planned into the grant because it's kind of required now in a few of in the part B. So I think that will be really useful, but it's just to pre-plan for that already and for everyone to think about it as there's sort of two areas that you want to focus on. So how our project is structured, the orbital ESRs, or what will be the doctoral candidates, DCs, are both the beginning and the end goal of the overall project. We talk about, Larry mentioned making sure that your partners and beneficiaries are invested and have good buy-in and that you have a really good cohort. And that's something that I can't express enough how fantastically involved every single partner and beneficiary is in our project. So they are on, there's at least one from everyone in our supervisory board, from every associated partner and beneficiary. We also have them represented in all of these subcommittees that help make sure each part of the project runs thoroughly. Then they make up, there's a small kind of core project management team that's representatives from each of these subcommittees. We'd meet every 6 months. So my job, again, the reason that maybe it's useful to have a project manager, my job is to make sure everyone's attending these meetings, schedule the meetings, do the minutes for the meetings, create the action items for the meetings, share the action items for the meetings, follow up on those action items. So that can be a lot of work for, say, a single coordinator, but a project manager who's dedicated to this task, it's quite useful. So we meet every 6 months, we share our reports then to the external advisory board, they give us feedback, and then we again present that to our researchers. And just to note that researchers also sit on the supervisory board and on some of these subcommittees as well. I think that's something also to remember, that your doctoral candidates or your early stage researchers have a lot of experience and know better how to do a lot of this work than even we would. They have their own experience and insight for what they need. So the project management team, as I said, these are the heads of our subcommittees here. They come from many of our partner beneficiaries across Europe. But then some other things to think about as well are, you know, getting involved with other ITNs and really networking, and a way to build connections and is to use the resources that MSCA and the EU and your access and that they've all created for you. So there's a project managers group that's online that I'm a part of. That's really great. We partner really closely with a couple different ITNs around Ireland and Europe focused on ocular disease. So we can share opportunities and upcoming workshops and webinars. There's also a project manager Allowance, which is the International Association for Project Managers. That's another EU project that has a ton of resources. And the biggest thing I can say from a project management side is just be prepared to be agile. I don't think we anticipated COVID-19, and I don't think we anticipated what's going on right now with Ukraine, and all of these impact the research. So if you expect your project to be agile, then the team itself needs to be agile as well. So this is just an example of kind of, I would call it, I don't want to call it a win, but it's a good, we have a really strong online profile. And again, this was pre-planned. It was in the grant that was written that we would have a strong communications and dissemination plan. We can talk about, you know, you can find the difference between what is communication and engagement and what is dissemination. They bleed into each other sometimes, but basically the idea is that you have a really strong, open facing profile. And we've done that through strategic management of social media channels and our website. We also have a very strong scientific profile, and we'll talk about our orbital publications and our peer review publications later towards the end. But these two things are sort of separate but equal, if you will, in regards to how we put them out. And we rely on our ESRs to create the content a lot. So that's another thing. You shouldn't be struggling to find stories. Your ESRs are doing work. So it's just about sharing that work. And they're better at social media than any of us ever will be. So that's just something to remember. One of the other things we realized right from the start when I started was that the website itself is a great tool, but we needed a tool to communicate across countries, across institutions, and share internal information. So, you know, sometimes OneDrive isn't the best because certain communities can't access it. Google Drive isn't the best because certain schools don't let you use it. The US doesn't follow GDPR law. So how do you share information with them through open platforms? So what I developed was, it's called an intranet system. And I would just, this is just a suggestion I have for any future projects, that it's quite useful. So maybe pre-plan for that, hold back a little bit of the management and indirect costs to help build that out. But basically, I'll just give a really brief run through here. Let's pretend I'm a researcher and I'm looking for an upcoming training opportunity. I can go into our system here and I can look and say, oh no, where are some, you know, useful documents that I need to find? I think that's where that is. And I can look in here, and there's the opportunity bank, and there's a live tool that can be updated by anyone in the consortium, including the researchers, and it can tell me some upcoming trainings. So that works, let's say if a conference was canceled because of COVID and you want to find a different webinar or something different, it'll always be there, and that's updated regularly. So that's just a trick of kind of getting information out to your partners and receiving information from your partners. And then finally, just some kind of brief planning and implementation tips. Again, I said, keep flexible, be agile, think about what can be done online well ahead of when it needs to be done online. Recruit as early as possible. I think anyone would tell you that recruiting is probably one of the toughest parts of the project overall. And, you know, especially in public institutions, it can be very difficult. Communicate regularly, and that's not just within your team, but also with your project officer. Caroline is ours, and she's incredibly fast and answers every question we have. I'm sure, you know, she gets sick of hearing from me sometimes, but she's a dream to work with. So, you know, communicate all the time. And then don't forget to touch base with your researchers regularly. It's really easy to stick to talking to the PIs and the beneficiaries and the associated partners, but you want to make sure that you're available for your researchers all the time. Things come up that are happening in their lives, and they need to be able to talk to someone kind of outside of their direct supervisory committee sometimes. So it's useful, again, to have a project manager who can play that role and help them with whatever they need. So I guess, yeah, Larry, I'll hand back over to you. I'll stop my video here.
Yeah, thanks, Tess. That really does kind of show, I suppose, the management side of things and how important it is to have a dedicated project management team to it, really. So I suppose this was very brief to just show some of the dissemination aspects and how having a consortium has really, and that training network has really helped us with this. In some cases, This here is a special issue that is dedicated to orbital research and the orbital researchers. So ultimately, this will be published as a book with the orbital logo and really kind of helps spread the message of orbital just on a scientific side of things as well. But as well as that, then other things have branched from the consortium where we've had other special issues from associated partners in orbital that focus on the same thing, for example, or in the same general fields. These are I suppose, networks and groups of people that have come together through orbital and then push towards, you know, other sorts of dissemination and output. So here's another example of where there's 3 of us are involved as co-guest editors, where it's not orbital specific, but it's in the area of orbital, and it helps really kind of broaden the dissemination output for the research that we're doing. We also have organized, for example, a special interest symposium in the EVA Congress. This was supposed to be for 2020, but now hopefully we'll have actually 2 combined for 2022 post-COVID. And we work on things like that. So just to really kind of drive the outputs as a team. So look, that's it from us at Orbital. Thanks very much. Any questions, you can contact us on our email address, and we'll be happy to answer anything in the question and answer session. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence and Tess, for sharing your experience. It's really inspiring to hear about the research that is going on and the efforts that you're making to communicate with both the outside world and also your ESRs as well. And it's lovely to hear, I suppose, about project management from the front line too. I'd like to introduce now our final speaker, and it's Professor Jane Souter. And Jane is Professor in the School of Communications in Dublin City University. Her research focuses on the information environment in the public sphere, and in particular on scaling up deliberation and tackling disinformation. Jane is Director of DCU's Institute for Future Media, Democracy and Society, and she's PI on a H2020 project called Provenance, which is a multi-million interdisciplinary project to combat disinformation. And she's also a coordinator of JOLT, which is the Marie Curie ITN. And she's leading a new project on countering COVID-19 and climate disinformation and the potential role of deliberation. Welcome, Jane, to the webinar, and I invite you now to share your screen.
Thanks so much, Jane. Good to see you all here. Can I just check, is that on full screen now?
That's full screen now. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, perfect. So like I'm aware that it's kind of 12 o'clock and people have just been listening to people talking at them for 60 minutes without any input. So I'll try to be kind of brief and leave some time for discussion. The project that I'm talking about today was called JOLT, and it's actually just coming to an end now. I have a Viva next week and another Viva in 2 months' time of 2 of the ESRs that I was supervising. A couple have already done it, and a lot are in train. So we're coming to the end of it. So obviously there will be differences between what we put in and what is required now under Horizon Europe, but you'd have seen a lot of that detail in the first presentation. I thought that what I would do, because you had a lot on kind of what's required there, is just try to give some kind of personal insight into actually pulling together the proposal rather than concentrating so much on the actual topic of what we were doing. So hopefully that will be useful to you. Our overall idea, though, just so as you're aware, was to try to pull together journalism and computer science and engineering. So we had supervisors who were in engineering and computer science faculties and others that were in social science faculties. And the idea was that our 15 ESRs, so our 15 early stage researchers, should learn in a proper kind of cross-disciplinary way, that the computer scientists would learn about the kind of social science sensibilities, and the social scientists would learn to be able to communicate with the computer scientists, because it's that lack of translation that often impacts not only for scholarship, but also in the real world. So that was our central idea of trying to bring the 2 things together. So it was, I think the important thing to realize, it was an ETN, which is, you know, part of the whole thing. As you know, we'd 15 ESRs and 16 supervisors. But I think that there's a few really important lessons here just for thinking about kind of pulling it together. First of all, is that those ESR contracts only run for 36 months, but almost everybody takes 48 months to do a PhD. So trying to think about how best to manage that, trying to persuade ESRs to save money for the fourth year, think about how you're going to manage PhD fees for the fourth year when they're not in there. It's worth thinking about all these things, because otherwise they will come back and kind of hit you afterwards. The other thing is that we'd 15 ESRs, but we'd 16 supervisors, because we had to have some supervisors who were outside of the academy. And I'll talk a bit about that in a minute, about trying to kind of balance between beneficiaries and partners and being clear. Because I know the first time that we wrote one of these, we got onto a wait list as opposed to being awarded it. And one of the things was that we weren't so sure about all these differences. So I'm not sure about everybody on this webinar, whether you're kind of aware of them or not. About the differences between the beneficiaries and the partners and how to kind of bring them together. So our beneficiaries are basically the people who are going to be given the budgets to host an ESR. So that's where somebody's full-time employment is going to be. These are the people who are going to be issuing employment contracts and who are going to be managing the budget. So for us, we had a range of universities in Dublin and Toulouse and Thessaloniki and Navarra in Spain, for example. But we also had ESRs who were based at the BBC. And that was one kind of environment, because we had 2 engineers based at BBC R&D Labs, which is obviously a very big, well-structured research environment. But we also had one at SAMSA, which is an SME in Paris. So, you know, she had a very different kind of research experience. So it's worth kind of reflecting on that and what you want and so on. So I think that's the first thing you need to do, is tie down who the actual beneficiaries are and make sure that they're really clear. And then the one thing I'd say is that in terms, the one thing that kind of came back and hit us and just was a little bit of a nuisance afterwards was we had to draw up an IP agreement with the BBC, for example. So, you know, it's good to have the actual IP tied down. How are you going to share it in some way in advance? And also to have the kind of sharing. So every group, I think, does it differently. But, you know, often it's about 50% of the sort of the management budget might go to the coordinator, so you can hire a fabulous project manager like you've just heard from before. But I think it's really good to actually think about that budget breakdown in advance, so people are aware of it and their research offices aren't looking horrified after you've been awarded it and suddenly you're coming looking for this. Then the other thing we actually did is we took, we had an agreement that there was a percentage of everybody's training budget that was also put centrally for DCU to manage, so as we could book all the flights and, you know, pay for everybody to do the different events of training. And then, you know, if you hosted your event in Paris, you would just send the invoice to DCU and we would pay for it out of that. So it's good to think about those kind of budget things before you've signed everything on the dotted line. Better to not have arguments afterwards. And then we had this network of partners, and our partners, as you'll see there, were journalism organizations like RTE and CNN and so on, but also others with the Irish Times, others that were more technical and were kind of providing services into journalism organizations. And a lot of these partners won't have ever participated before in any European funding. So it can be a bit of a nightmare getting all those letters, making sure they all get their picks, you know, the actual number that they're going to need in order to register. The whole European platform can be a bit of a tricky to navigate if you've never navigated before and you're an SME and you're trying to do it. So there can be a lot of hand-holding required there. So I think to be really clear to partners about what's required and to try to have the resources to hold their hands to be able to go through the whole portal thing. Otherwise, you'll find them falling out. And it's also, I think, especially if you're dealing with smaller ones, or we were dealing with media, where there's a large turnover of staff, but I think that's the case in a lot of places. So you've been dealing with somebody and then they're gone and you don't have anybody else. So always try to think, well, who's the second person who you can reach out to, and try to have sort of more depth in your relationship, or else you might end up with more changes than you want going through it. So the way we did it, the way we structured it, was to have different work packages. So like I, as coordinator, looked after the ethics, which has to go in, and then obviously the management. And then we had the different beneficiaries looking after some of the actual research questions, but we made sure that all of those were multidisciplinary and so on. But in reality, what you'll find is that, you know, the academics in the beneficiaries are very difficult to actually be filling out the reporting for Europe on the work packages and so on. So it will be the project manager who's leading on a lot of that and doing an awful lot of that work. So you really want to, you know, put some focus onto hiring a really good, really nice project manager who's capable not only of doing all the organizational work and all of the kind of minding of the ESRs that you heard about, but also the drafting of all these reports and that kind of thing. So I think every project is different, but having each work package having some sort of way that it works together and builds on the whole rather than seeing them as different silos is probably very important to the evaluation. There's a real focus, and I think it's still there in Horizon Europe, on network-wide training and activities. So we actually had 2 a year. I saw a successful one last year that just had one, and the other one was virtual. But it's something to really think about, is like what exactly is going to be in your training, who's going to deliver it, how are you actually going to manage it. Ours was kind of tricky because we had to have training that was suitable for computer science PhDs as well as journalism studies PhDs and people in between. So it's to really think about how to divide that up and where to do it and so on. But I think it's at the core, and it's important for the evaluation that it's shown that you've really thought about what are the actual training opportunities that these people are going to, your ESRs are going to have. Because I think the EC wants people who not only might become great academics in the future, but that also will be able to contribute to European industry and so on. And a part of that is the secondment. So that's where you're really thinking about your link with partners. And I think you need to think about it very carefully, because it's easy when you're writing a proposal just to put in some sort of secondment, but then you'll find that when you recruit an ESR, that maybe their topic will change slightly. They won't want to go with exactly that secondment. So building in some sort of flexibility that you're not actually going back to your project manager and trying to do official amendments all the time to that kind of thing is important. Now, obviously, COVID, you know, really impacted our secondments, and they ended up, a lot of them being virtuals, which was a great pity. But I think you have to plan, obviously, for them to be in person. So the last thing I'd say is, look, changes are possible, but they are potentially complex. They do take quite a while. There is, for good reason, quite a lot of bureaucracy around it. So do try to be really clear in your discussions with your beneficiaries and your partners about exactly how the secondments are going to work, exactly who's going to deliver the training and where, and what's the kind of focus of it. So then you're likely to keep your network intact after you get funding, and you're likely to have fewer changes, which will be really important. So thank you all. Hopefully I've left enough time for questions now.
Great, thank you very much, Jane. That's perfect timing. That worked out very well. I'd now like to bring in our guests to join me on the panel. I want to thank Jane for being so honest, really, about the challenges that you faced, and I suppose the importance of planning ahead where you can. And as you said, COVID really affected all of the research in lots of different ways. So now we have our panel joining us. I want to thank as well people who submitted questions, both at registration and those who are submitting through the chat function and through the Q&A function. So we'll try to get through as many of them as we can, and any of them we don't get through, we will follow up afterwards. Caroline, I might start with you, if that's okay. You mentioned in your presentation that resubmission restrictions are being introduced this year. So if applicants get below 80% in their proposal, they can't resubmit the following year. And there's a couple of queries have come in about the definition of a resubmission. And is there any update? Is there any further clarification about what a resubmission might look like?
Yes, so we have the new call coming up soon. So you will have the documents online on the 12th of May. But in the guide of applicants, we have a small description of the resubmission restrictions, which says that so proposals having received a score below 80% in this year's call are not eligible to resubmit. A similar proposal in the end 2022 call, a similar proposal or contract is one that differs from the current one in minor ways, and in which some of the present consortium members are involved. So it's a very vague descriptions, and this year we actually count on, we have a trust-based approach, we count on the projects to say that it's a resubmission, and if we really see that, then in the end this year we will have projects that are actually resubmitting and had the below 80%, that it's actually really similar and yeah, not a big difference, then we'll see if we need a more precise description of resubmission next year. But for the moment, we trust that no similar proposals will be resubmitted if it was below 80%, and that everybody who is resubmitting also fills in the self-declaration that it is a resubmission.
Great, thanks Caroline for that clarification. So as Caroline said, it's on part A, you'll have to self-declare, and then it can't be judged as similar. So no minor changes or same people in the consortium. Another question, I know you mentioned this in your presentation, but I just might ask you to reiterate it. Of the 3 different modalities now in the doctoral networks, how many PhDs will they fund? So we know this is different to the H2020.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So like in the normal, you can have up to 10 PhDs, and in the others, 15 PhD students. Is this what is meant?
Yes, yeah. That's it exactly. That's it exactly, yeah. So it's really, I suppose, there's really an incentive to look at the industrial and joint networks as opposed just to the standard one. A question that has come up, and Jane covered in her presentation, is a little bit on the budget from her side, which is very useful. But one question that has come up in the chat is that in most universities, a PhD program lasts 4 years, but the doctoral networks will fund, the maximum is 36 months. So I suppose 2 questions really. How should applicants approach this in the proposal? Am I right in thinking they should write up the projects as 3-year projects?
Well, they can mention that there will be additional funding for a 4th year. I didn't actually know that it's such a problem in Ireland also, because I have mostly the Dutch beneficiaries concerned with this, and they actually have something in the Netherlands that funds this 4th year. They have a specific fund, and then they can mention this in the proposal. So other countries that have this problem, yeah, I think you should mention that, of course, the student will get a PhD and will not stop just after the 36 months. So if you find some additional funding, yeah, but unfortunately, the money cannot come from us. I saw in the question and answers somewhere also, can we use the leftover institutional costs? No, our funding just covers the 3 years for the student, and then you need to come up with another way of funding the student. But I think it's best to describe this in the proposal already, so that the evaluators know the student will in the end get a PhD.
Great, yeah, thanks for that. Jane, I know you mentioned in your presentation that you encourage the students to really budget themselves for the 4th year.
Yeah, so we had different things. So every university, I think, is different in Ireland, and even different faculties. So with us, our faculty funded the fees, and everybody's fees were funded, you know, on an EU basis, no matter what. And then if they were willing to kind of teach, then they were given the PhD stipend for year 4. So that is available for others, but that's not available for everybody. And so I think if you're going to apply for one of these, it's really important to go to your dean, go to your university, find out exactly what the institutional position is going to be about paying the year 4 fees, see if it's possible to pay a stipend for 1 year. And you have to note that even like Irish stipends are about half of what is paid to an ESR. So they will be taking a 50% pay cut in year 4, even if you do pay a stipend. So it's quite problematic. I'm not sure why it's only funded for 3 years when PhDs take 4. So we did try to encourage people to save, and then some people started working part-time and things. But I think you have to be aware of it and go to the management in your institution and you know, have clear expectations so as you can write them in ahead of time.
Brilliant, thank you, Jane. That's really useful advice. I wonder, Lawrence and Tess, would that be your experience as well with Orbital?
Yeah, absolutely. Jane has pretty much covered it all. There, you know, it is quite a difficult thing. I know some European organisations, they may finish it in 3 years, but for mobility, for example, it's structured PhD, and it has to be, you know, it's 48 months. So again, encouraged and reminding to save, you know, and really we made it very clear on the recruitment side of it as well, you know, so that from the very beginning, people are aware that this is 36-month funded, and you will have to look for external funding after that, you know. So we're at the stage now where we're moving into looking at that. So Jane definitely has more experience around that side of it. Yeah,
and I think it's very important that the researchers know what's funded and what isn't, probably at the start. We had a query come in at the registration about any advice you could give to first-time applicants in relation to the size of the consortium. And I thought I might put that to you, Lawrence, and also Jane and Tess, about what is your feeling about the size of the consortium. I think under H2020, there was advice that maybe between 6 to 10 beneficiaries is quite manageable. And does that reflect your experience, or would you advise a first-time applicant to have a think about the size of the consortium?
I think it's very difficult for any beneficiary to go through all of the bureaucracy and all of the hassle involved with it for one ESR. So I think really you want to be, it's better if there are at least 2 ESRs in each beneficiary, because there's a lot of bureaucracy required for them, and you know, if you want to ensure that they stay in. And also it means that the ESRs have like a little mini network themselves anyway, because there's 2 at an institution. So I know where we had just one somewhere that, you know, sometimes they felt kind of lonely or a bit more isolated, and so on. So depending on the number you have, you know, I think will then determine how many beneficiaries you're going to have.
Yeah, and Tess, from a project management side, I know you've managed other large projects. Would you have any advice from a first-time applicant in terms of the size of the consortium?
I think overall our consortium is quite large. We have 11 beneficiaries. I think overall the size of the consortium is really dependent on the type of people that you're bringing into it. So if you can tell from the beginning that someone is interested, but only tertiarily, or only, you know, kind of maybe wants to host 1 or 2 trainings, then don't pressure them into doing more. Like, pay attention to which beneficiaries are super involved. And like I said, Larry put together just a fantastic group of people that are super invested. So even though our consortium is quite large, we've had 100% engagement from everyone all the way across. Part of that, again, is because they have I call, you know, myself the designated annoyer. Like, I'm there to make sure that they're always involved and sending them the reminders and the emails and things. So again, having a project manager on hand is very useful. But I think, yeah, if you're going to go ahead and have a big consortium like we have, you know, in some stages we have 60 to 70 kind of representatives at any given time that we're working with. You want to make sure that those people are involved all the time. If you don't have the team, the management team in place to keep all those people involved, then yeah, look to a smaller consortium. So capabilities determine size, I think, the capability of the project management team overall. And Larry, you probably know more about that.
Well, just I would add to it that, you know, you kind of get a feel for that during the application process, because you're looking for people to volunteer for training and volunteer for, you know, what they're going to provide to the consortium. And so I suppose we were lucky in the sense that everybody was very involved from the beginning, and to be fair, has carried that through once we got funded. But that was a good way for us to kind of gauge who wanted to be involved and how they wanted to be involved. Certainly, smaller would be easier, but I think bigger does provide a lot of opportunities then for people as well, you know, and that's up to particularly in secondment and particularly around the training aspect of it.
Great. And Lawrence, can I ask you how long it took you to build your consortium, just in terms of a timeline?
It's all sort of in the midst of time now, probably, and it kind of grew organically. So I would say probably from about 2015 till we submitted first in 2017, you know, so probably a year or two, maybe 18 months to build the consortium. And, you know, what happened was people said, oh, this would be a great partner to have involved. And then we would, you know, so somebody would get involved, but then they would bring somebody else in, and it kind of grew sort of organically. But again, and I think Jane mentioned it, you know, it's really useful for us, we had a lot of support in now SETU, but at the time WIT, from our research office, from our finance office, from our tech transfer office. So we put those IP agreements in place at the start, and they really did a lot of the chasing up of, you know, getting those signatures from the different departments and so on, and different organizations, which allowed people to contribute more openly and freely then to the application, I suppose. So that was maybe something, and Jane said it earlier, so I just reiterate that, get that done as early as possible. It is not easy to chase up, in our case at the time, 23 or 24 legal signatures, you know, from around the world. So yeah, you use the resources in your organization to help with that.
Absolutely. And a question has come in the Q&A about, I'm not sure if you'd like to answer this, Lawrence or Jane. Were you successful the first time you applied for a doctoral network, or an ITN as it was at the time, or was it a question of resubmitting the proposal?
We got onto a wait list the first time we did it. So I think we scored, I don't know, whatever it was, 94% or something, and then we were on a wait list, and then we resubmitted the next year. And then we actually found that the first year's one then got accepted on the resubmission, which was actually quite frustrating because we'd actually made improvements to it in the next year. But because the first one was the one that had been evaluated, we had to go back to that one. So that's why we had kind of more changes. It would have been nice if we could have implemented some of the changes that we thought about for our resubmission, but we couldn't.
Yeah, well, good to know the reserve list. Sometimes people do get off those reserve lists. So that's
Also, can I just say something really quickly about the size of the network? So when I was saying was about it's just easier, you know, administratively to keep the beneficiaries smaller, but like for the secondment and training opportunities, I think if you can make your partner network really large, you know, to really provide all of those opportunities, then that's kind of what worked for us. I think the more the better, the more the merrier with partners, if you can bring them along.
Great, thanks for that. Caroline, there's I've just gone through a couple of maybe budget questions. Can you just clarify where the fees should be costed to for the 3 years of funding? Is it the RTN or is it the management and indirect costs?
Which type of fees?
I think it's the tuition fees. Right there,
tuition fees, yeah, it's covered by the research training and networking costs. So the researchers should not pay tuition fees. It should be covered by the research training and networking costs.
Okay, that's great. So the RTN costs should cover that. And a question came up about on our panel about the UK, which I think Yvonne has answered. So the situation is the same as it has been for some time now. So they're being treated as associated partners, and they have to be associated at the time of the grant agreement will be signed. But another question emerged about third countries, and specifically America and Canada. And obviously they can't receive funding directly. But can they receive funding indirectly if it's agreed with the other beneficiaries, perhaps through a consortium agreement?
Okay, so first for the UK, they haven't signed the association agreement yet. This is a big problem for this year's call. We're expecting this to be signed soon. So hopefully for the 2020 call applications, they will just be associated country fully, like all other associated countries. But for this year, they haven't signed it yet. So this is a problem. But then for USA and Canada, they can receive funding in exceptional cases, like I mentioned, like if in the proposal, there's a description that this beneficiary is really needed. I mean, this is really exceptional cases. So I would imagine maybe Canada, for if the research is some social studies about Inuits, you might need some organization in Canada, but this is really on a case-by-case basis and very rare and evaluated in the proposal. And otherwise, they actually can only participate as associated partner. And then, of course, they can get some money for the costs they incur during a second month or for providing a training. But they don't get any funding from us. It's they get from the research training and training cost category. They can get money for some training they provide or for hosting a second month.
Okay, that's great. Is it recommended, Caroline, that recruitment is managed, or could it be managed centrally by the coordinator, or should it be done by each beneficiary? Or have projects done it differently?
No rule or obligation for this at all, but we have experience with the projects that central recruitment seems to work better. But this is really based on the project, on how they work, how different the recruitments are. In some cases, maybe the PIs need totally different profiles, and then it doesn't help throwing everybody in one pot. In other cases, we have very similar individual projects, and then the ESR or the doctoral candidates can even apply for different posts within the same project and say, this is my favorite post, but they can go to another post. It's up to the consortium to organize, but in many success stories, there were central recruitment, but it depends a bit on how your project is organized and how different the profiles are.
Great, okay, thank you for that. And just one final question I might put to Jane and Lawrence and Tess. In terms of ESOR training, can you comment on in-person versus virtual meetings? And I think for both of your projects, you mentioned COVID really played havoc with the in-person trainings. But how many meetings would you were envisaged during the project?
With us, we had 2 a year, and they were all envisaged pretty much to be in person. I know now people are doing more virtual ones, but I think they really need to be thought through. I think they can't just be kind of on Zoom, because we all know ourselves, you know, people sit there and they do their emails and so on. And definitely our ESRs fed back that, you know, they just didn't have the same kind of networking and team building and all of those kind of opportunities from virtual ones as they had for in person. But obviously there's climate considerations and different things. So, but I think the virtual ones would need to be really well planned and evaluated to actually make sure they are doing what they're meant to do.
Great, thank you, Jane. And Tess and Lawrence, is that your feeling as well?
Yeah, we definitely had planned for about 2 a year as well, for the network-wide training, and then smaller versions that were optional or elective. But all of ours were virtual until this year, really, because we got hit from the kickoff point. But there was a huge difference once our researchers got to meet, and like Jane said, with the network, and it's just an entirely different thing. They get to, meet people, learn a lot more, particularly if it's a lab-based training, for example, so it depends on the type of training as well.
And just to say as well that one of the ways that we were able to pivot around is once maybe some inter-country travel was done, so not international, but then we could bring down researchers from Dublin and even North, we talked about maybe we'll do mini trainings in different locations. We really tried to find different ways to let our researchers still engage with each other if they weren't from the same institution, but were maybe in the same country. So a lot of our researchers, one was in Madrid and one was in Santiago, and they were able to come together to do a training together. So that was the way that we made those optional trainings still networking when we could.
Great, terrific. Well, time is against us today. It has just gone 12:30, so we have to bring this session to an end. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank particularly our guests for giving so generously of their time and of their experiences. Just a reminder that the recording of today's webinar will be made available. I know Yvonne has placed the link there. Yvonne has also created a 10-minute bite-sized video which summarised the Doctoral Network call, which we hope might be useful for you. And please do contact myself or Yvonne in the Irish Marie Skłodowska-Curie office if you can help with any queries, and particularly any queries we didn't get to today. I'd like to say goodbye to everyone. I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. Take care and goodbye for now. Thank you.